The Times investigation exposes Sentabale'S operational collapse. When the Times sent a reporter to Lesotho this week to investigate the charity crisis engulfing Sentabale, they found something that no legal filing, no Charity Commission inquiry, no High Court defamation action could obscure: the complete abandonment of the very children the organisation was created to serve. The Mamohato Children's Centre in Lihaseng, the physical manifestation of Sentabale'S mission and the backdrop for countless photographs of Harry and Prince Seeso, stood with locked gates and an empty car park, its grounds unkempt and neglected. Villagers reported that residential sessions have not been held for months, reducing this purpose-built facility to little more than a venue for weddings. This stark reality was crystallized in the words of Koabane Theko, the principal chief of Thababosyu, and precisely the community leader this entire institutional machinery was supposedly designed to protect, who told the journalist, "Taking legal action does not help anyone. I would rather they do something to help children." This makes it look like the charity's leadership is focused on its own interests rather than getting things going. Those words, self-indulgent, poor use of resources, focused on its own interests, cut through all the institutional noise and landed on the truth that the Charity Commission itself had been circling, that the defamation action proceeding in London, funded by unnamed external money, does not serve the charity's purposes and has instead consumed the energy, attention and financial resources that should have been directed toward Lesotho, leaving children waiting behind locked gates while their supposed advocates fight for themselves in court. Sentabale'S mission lost in legal battles, Principal Chief Koabane Theko, whose community was meant to be the primary beneficiary of Sentabale'S work, has delivered a damning assessment of the charity's current leadership. When asked about the ongoing High Court defamation action, he was unequivocal. Taking legal action does not help anyone, and he would rather see the charity's resources devoted to actually serving vulnerable children. His words cut to the heart of the matter, that the charity's leadership appears consumed by institutional self-preservation rather than its stated charitable mission. The chief's observation that the lawsuit makes it look like the charity is focused on its own interests rather than getting things going represents a failure of the most fundamental kind. A community leader, precisely the person this entire dispute was theoretically designed to protect, has lost faith that the organisation is working in his people's best interest. His simple but powerful statement stands in stark contrast to the elaborate machinery of the dispute itself. The Charity Commission inquiries, the High Court filings, the media campaigns, all supposedly marshalled in service of vulnerable children, yet none of it translating into actual help for those children in Lesotho. The abandoned centre, where purpose meets padlock. When the Times journalist arrived at the Mamohato Children's Centre in Lihaseng, they encountered a facility that bore no resemblance to its intended mission. The gates stood locked, a physical barrier that seemed to symbolize the wider disconnection between institutional purpose and ground reality. The grounds themselves appeared neglected, lacking the care one might expect of a centre designed to nurture vulnerable children. The car park, once presumably bustling with activity, now sat empty, a void where vehicles and visitors should have been. Local residents painted a picture of complete stasis. Residential programs, they reported, had not been held for months. The centre, once envisioned as the beating heart of Sentabale'S operations, had been reduced to something altogether different. One villager's observation was particularly damning. The building now functioned primarily as a venue for hosting weddings, its grand halls repurposed for celebrations rather than serving the children it was ostensibly built to protect. This is the same centre photographed alongside Harry and Prince Seiso, the physical manifestation of Sentabale's founding vision. Yet here it stood, gates locked, grounds unkempt, programs suspended, its transformation from sanctuary to event space a stark indictment of what had transpired during the organisation's recent tumultuous period. Financial deterioration and the collapse of donor support. The financial picture that emerges from Sentabale's 2024 accounts is, quite simply, stark. The charity recorded a deficit of approximately $1.6 million, a figure that speaks to the institutional breakdown now consuming the organisation from within. More damning still is what happened to the $1.2 million donation derived from sales of Harry's memoir, Spare. Money that should have bolstered Sentabale's capacity to serve vulnerable children in Lesotho, yet has been substantially depleted during the period of Chandauka's leadership. This is not merely a matter of budget shortfalls or economic headwinds. This is the predictable consequence of institutional chaos, the kind of financial hemorrhaging that follows when an organisation turns inward and loses sight of its mission. International donors, those relationships carefully nurtured over nearly 2 decades by the founding princes and the original board, have cooled or withdrawn entirely during the dispute period. At least one major donor relationship was terminated abruptly after a single meeting, a casualty of the toxic atmosphere that now surrounds Sentabale's leadership. This is the funding collapse that was always going to follow the departure of those whose personal relationships and gravitational pull sustained the charity's income for 19 years. The money is gone, the donors are gone, and in their place there is only the sound of locked gates and the silence of programs that no longer run. The unravelling. When charity leadership lost its way, the funding collapse came swiftly, a consequence of relationships that had been stretched too thin by internal conflict and poor stewardship. Major donor relationships terminated abruptly after single meetings, a stark indicator that confidence had evaporated and trust could not be restored through conversation or reconciliation. This was the inevitable crisis that followed the departure of the founding board and the 2 founding princes, whose personal relationships and gravitational pull had sustained Sentabale's income for 19 years. Without those foundational connections, the institutional memory and moral authority they represented, the charity's financial machinery ground to a halt. International donors cooled or fell away during the dispute, their withdrawal a silent but devastating referendum on the organisation's direction. The loss of these personal relationships that had anchored the charity's support for nearly 2 decades exposed a fundamental truth. Sentabale had been built on the credibility and networks of its founders, and when those bonds were severed by leadership decisions that prioritised internal disputes over mission delivery, there was nothing left to fall back on. The money that had flowed reliably for nearly 20 years simply stopped coming, leaving the organisation to face not just a reputational crisis, but an existential one. Leadership management concerns. Former colleagues who have worked directly with Chandauka paint a troubling picture of executive overreach that extended far beyond the traditional parameters of a chair's role. She operated with a hands-on intensity that blurred the critical boundaries between board oversight and day-to-day operational management, inserting herself into decisions that should have remained within management's domain. A source with direct knowledge of her tenure at Nandi Life Sciences, the biotech firm she established with her brother, described her approach as deeply interventionist, involving herself in the smallest details, convening frequent meetings, and maintaining close surveillance over staff work. Her management style, these colleagues report, could turn harsh when circumstances displeased her. She was known to raise her voice at staff members when outcomes fell short of expectations. The environment she created, according to those who experienced it, carried an emotional toll, fostering an increasingly centralized decision-making structure in which dissent was neither welcomed nor tolerated. As one source put it plainly, she doesn't quite enjoy hearing contrary opinions. This pattern of micromanagement and intolerance for disagreement suggests a leadership approach fundamentally at odds with the collaborative governance structures that charities require to function effectively and serve their communities with integrity. Nandi Life Sciences and questions of accountability. A source familiar with Nandi Life Sciences, the biotech firm established by Chandauka and her brother, has raised serious questions about the company's operational transparency and financial stewardship. The firm maintains registrations in both Delaware and Texas, yet its current operational status remains unclear, with no visible presence on the roster of companies at the biotech startup incubator where it is listed at an address. Most troubling is that Nandi Life Sciences has reportedly raised $6 million in investment capital, with little visibility over how that money was deployed or spent. When the Times made inquiries about the firm's standing as a going concern, Tinashe Chandauka declined to clarify its status. What cannot be ignored is that the legal action now consuming resources and institutional focus in the Sentabale'S dispute is being funded by unnamed external money, a source of financing that demands disclosure and, ultimately, court testimony under oath. The accountability machinery, the Charity Commission process, the High Court filings, the various public statements was ostensibly designed to serve vulnerable children. Yet here, in the shadows of this dispute, sits undisclosed funding and unaccounted capital, raising the fundamental question of whose interests are truly being served. The truth demands disclosure. The identity of the lawsuit's financial backer must be revealed under oath during court proceedings. This is not a matter of curiosity, but of institutional accountability. When the Charity Commission posed its straightforward question about how this legal action furthers Sentabale'S charitable purposes, the answer came not from London boardrooms or legal briefs, but from Koabane Theiko, the principal chief of Thababosyu, a man whose community was meant to benefit from this charity's existence. His response was unambiguous. It does not. That statement, delivered by the very person these institutional mechanisms were theoretically designed to protect, exposes the fundamental disconnect between the lawsuit's consumption of resources and the charity's actual mission. The urgent reality is inescapable. While legal teams file motions and unnamed donors finance defamation claims, the Mamohato Children's Centre sits behind locked gates with an empty car park, its grounds unkempt, its programs stalled for months. The vulnerable children of Lesotho are not waiting for court judgments. They are waiting for the doors to reopen, for the resources currently hemorrhaged into litigation to be redirected toward the programs that justify Sentabale'S existence. Every pound spent on this lawsuit is a pound not spent on the children. Every hour of attention devoted to this dispute is an hour not devoted to rebuilding what has been lost. The person funding this action owes Lesotho, owes the Charity Commission, and owes the community that trusted in this charity's purpose a straightforward answer delivered in open court, under oath, with their name attached to their choice.